Hi, and welcome back. We are here for our very last module, Module 7, All Around Assessment. And as you can see on your screen, we know assessment is important. It allows us to find errors, correct errors, teach and support the students, and help make sure that they are able to be successful. So we're really excited to dig into this work. I am David Lieben.
I am Carrie Swanson.
Just kidding. So we're excited to be back here with you for our very last module, and hope that the work has been really informative, and that student achievement partners have been able to really help you in your roles as educators and the work that you do each day. Our goals for today's module are as follows. We want to explain why assessment is so critical to the teaching of foundational skills. You really can't do as good a job teaching foundational skills without it. And we're going to talk through some daily and weekly assessment options that are swift and easy to implement in the classroom. So we've spent the past 6 weeks looking at all of the aspects of foundational skills, right? And print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. And now that we've covered the content, we're really turning our attention to thinking about, have the students learned it? How do we know if the students have learned what it is that we've been trying so hard to teach them? The National Reading Panel has a quote here that speaks to the importance of assessment. We know it's critical that we're assessing student progress frequently, that it is informing our instruction, and that we are then filling in the gaps as needed in a really swift and immediate way. So again, a quick time to pause. Last week, we asked you to think about a skill that you acquired, or something that you saw someone acquire, and the practice that went into it. And now we would like you to connect that to feedback. So if you can pause the module and think or talk with your colleagues about what role the coach or teacher played, and try to be really specific about the things that the coach or the teacher did that helped you to acquire the skill. When you're done, press play on the module again. We came up with a list here around the role of a teacher or coach, and it may match your list. You may have come up with a few things that are different from ours, but we know it's important that the teacher or the coach is noticing errors and providing immediate feedback. Errors that are not addressed become habits, and so we want to make sure that that frequent practice we talked about in the last module is met with just as frequent feedback and support. And then as needed, reteaching might happen. So there might be modeling, there might be addressing an old skill, reteaching as needed, and once again, the opportunity to practice where the teacher is supporting and monitoring. And this is a repetitive cycle. It should happen over and over and over. When we're talking about assessment, it can become really dangerous. The assessment takes a really long time and results in stagnant groups for students. And the pace at which foundational skills are taught needs to be quite quick. It changes each week, and it needs to be met with that quick action on the part of the teacher in terms of assessing and following up and responding. So we have a few big ideas around assessment and how it helps you play that coaching role. First of all, with very frequent supportive assessment, students are able to correct the errors that they're making and maintain progress, right? So if they are not, if they don't have the proper form for their free throws in the basketball game, they're able to correct their form. Same thing here. They can maintain the progress that they need. And in that way, teachers can swiftly reteach so that gaps don't grow, so the Matthew effect doesn't happen, as David's talked about so much in this course. And when students are missing instruction, if they are out of the classroom, assessment helps you have structures for catching those gaps. Teachers can note who is absent, who is late, or missing for any reason, and they know exactly what skill they need to fill in. So we have some data here around student attendance and how it is directly linked to student performance. You can pause for a second to read the quote that's on the screen. So a report from the nonprofit Attendance Work, based on an analysis of NAEP scores, found that there was a huge correlation between attendance rates and performance. And while progress monitoring doesn't directly address that, it doesn't prevent absenteeism, it does give teachers a mechanism to think about how to fill in gaps when students are absent a lot, and a very clear path. We spoke earlier in the course around the difference between responding to phonics needs in order to address a book on a given day versus using a scope and sequence. And when you're using the scope and sequence and a student is absent, you know exactly what you need to fill in.
Attendance is a remarkable issue. I've been involved in education for 45 years. And I taught every grade full-time from 4 to 9, and part-time from K to 2, as I may have mentioned earlier. Teaching K for just 2 hours a day was the most demanding part of my entire life. And also taught high school, and also taught community college, and also teach teachers. In my teaching life, attendance was one of the things that drove me nuts. Yet in seminars I go to, in classes I've taken, in presentations, you hardly ever hear about attendance and the problem of absent students or late students. One of the major advantages of the kind of approach to foundational skills that we've been talking about is you know exactly what someone missed. If someone was absent 3 days when you introduced consonant blends, you know you've got to capture them in consonant blends. In programs that are foundational skills but not structured phonics, you're not completely prepared, because you're going on the basis of the books the students read and what spelling sound patterns or phonics patterns happen to come up. And the student who missed 3 days doesn't get the benefit of you knowing exactly what he missed and exactly what you need to catch her up.
When we started this module, we talked about, or when we started this course, we talked about making sure that we were focusing on what was in our control in schools and in classrooms. And this is a good example of how we can't control absenteeism, but we can control how we're monitoring progress. So as David was talking about, assessment connects to sequence, right? We know that students have to recognize initial consonant sounds, and they have to be successful there before they're likely to be successful with the medial sounds in 2 sound words. They need to recognize 2 sound words before they can recognize all of the sounds in 3 sound words. So if you miss a piece here, you're going to continue to fall behind as the skill progresses. So in this case, assessment allows you a really clear snapshot of what you need to support before you can expect students to move on with a lot of success. So we're going to go through some types of assessment, spending the most time on those that are in our control as teachers or might be in your control in school buildings, and really thinking about how to maximize assessment. And just like in our practice module, we're thinking about minimizing the effort that goes into it and maximizing the output. So we recommend sort of thinking of assessment in 3 tiers, so 3 types of assessment. The very first type is informal. It's based on observation in the classroom, and it can happen all the time. The second tier is weekly, and we have an assessment protocol we'll go through around using dictation for that. And the last one is some formal unit assessment, something where you're stopping and checking about progress that's maintained every 4 to 6 weeks. Usually your unit assessment or your stop and check is based on the discretion of your school or district, and sometimes based on your core program. So we're going to start by thinking a little bit more about the one that's in the teacher's control for the observations.
I just want to point out one mistake we made. That should be every 3 to 6 weeks. In fact, one of the programs that I've been working with that I know is a high quality aligned program for foundational skills, and that just this week got verified in research, does this every 3 weeks, and some other programs do it every 3 weeks.
So we're going to start off just thinking about observations and what we can see in the classroom. And the observation checklist can only be implemented by a classroom teacher. So it's important that you have some sort of note-taking system for your informal observations. This is not something that should be memorized. We do in our guidance documents have a template that's provided for this purpose. You could use it, you could create your own, you may already use one. But the idea is you're doing quick notes on students and noticing their mastery, their inconsistent challenges, or their larger challenges where more practice is needed. And you're doing that throughout all of the different opportunities for practice that we talked about in the last module. Just a few kind of rules of thumb here, or principles for effective informal assessment. You want to keep it as simple as possible. This is not intensive note-taking, something that you can do very easily while you're sort of juggling the other balls that are in the air while teaching. We suggest kind of a check, a question mark, or an X, some sort of quick code. And you want to have a plan. You can't see every student every day. You have 20, 25, 30 students in your room. So having a plan for who you're going to monitor that day helps you to prioritize. Work in some point to pause to take your notes, jot those notes after your small group or right after you've done a task. And then be strategic about varying tasks. So you don't want to always be monitoring oral progress. You want to make sure you're also getting to hear the reading or getting to see the writing. Not a time for popsicle sticks. It's a time to be really strategic about who you're seeing and why.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. It's very easy, without embarrassing students or causing them to feel bad, to focus more on the students who need the help the most. And what I've seen happen in our school and in schools that I'm working with is the kids know that they're going to be called on more because they've been struggling, and they come to accept it, and it keeps them on their feet, and it helps everybody.
So just a couple of examples here, connecting the practice that we focused on last week with what informal assessments can look like. So if you take a look at this student work, right, where the students were identifying that AI made the long A sound, and they were writing words that matched the context of the sentence, we can see that the student did well. So you can monitor, you don't necessarily even have to collect it. You might be over the shoulder. You can monitor and say the student is doing really well. You might take a look at another set of work. In this case, looking a little bit more closely, we see that the student didn't meet the directions here. The directions were looking for the same vowel sound that you hear in earth. And we see that the student did a visual match. They wrote EA words instead. So in this case, right now the students did not do well with this assignment. We might need more information to know whether it was a struggle with following directions or a struggle with the sound, but it lets you know to look more closely at that student to monitor them more closely. So very brief, takes a very brief amount of time and lets you gather a lot of data about your students. Continuing that sort of example, we watched the practice that can come at the end of the decodables. We got to see Zoe model that practice for us. And when you're doing that with your small groups, you can note how accurate students are. You can note whether there are common errors across the group, or you can note if individual students are having some sort of disconnect between what they are able to do in writing and what they're able to do when the tasks are based on their speaking or their hearing. So lots of chances to observe students in work and make quick notes informally, so you can be gathering really frequent data. We'll move from that really important part of data collection, the observation checklist, into a more formalized procedure, thinking about needing to collect weekly data. Some of you all have programs that do a good job with this. And you may want to stay with those programs, so you may want to borrow some from the protocol that we've come up with. The assessment protocol is in the guidance documents and also in your handout. And it is a weekly assessment. It is done through dictation, so students are encoding, right? They're writing what it is that we're saying. And the idea is that this assessment should come along with a plan for how you're going to respond to it each week. So we made it as simple as possible. so that you can implement it without taking up a lot of instructional time. You can grade it easily, and you can respond to it immediately. So the gist of this dictation assessment is you would be dictating 10 words. You're dictating those orally, and at least 7 or 8 of them are focusing on the sound and spelling patterns that you're working on in that week. You may want to choose 2 or 3 that could be based on previously taught content, maybe a chance to check up on some sound and spelling patterns that kids were struggling with that you provided some reteaching. And then 1 sentence, and that sentence is a chance to have meaningful text. So you would use some of the words that have the sound and spelling pattern of the week, and then some new or previously taught high frequency words. So if you would like to read the protocol in more depth, you want to pause now and take a look at the protocol in your handout to make sure that you're clear on what it consists of. A quick reminder for you here is you want to include nonsense words in your dictation. And the reason to include those nonsense words is to make sure that kids are really accessing the sound and spelling pattern accurately, not that they're memorizing words. So that gives you a chance to just assess the sound and make sure that they're accurately spelling it according to the sound and spelling pattern. So at this point, hopefully you have a good sense of what the protocol consists of. Just a couple of kindergarten considerations. If you haven't taught enough sound and spelling patterns earlier in kindergarten, you can't do the dictation as is. You have to modify it to match what you have taught. So, we did a lot of examples with M and S as early learning in kindergarten. In that case, the modification might be to say words and have the kids write the letter that makes the first sound. As you move into vowel sounds, maybe students would be listening for the short vowel that they hear in words. So you can modify that dictation until they've learned enough skills to make up a word list that allows you to get to 10 words. And then when you're thinking about responding to the data, immediately after assessing, you're thinking, did a lot of my students experience challenges? Do I need whole class reteaching? Or did I have individual kids who need small group support? The response to the data is as important as the collection of the data.
In one of the states I was working with that was beginning to implement this kind of structured phonics program in a number of their schools, we found remarkably clearly that there was a relatively easy way to distinguish what was causing those schools that did not succeed with this to not succeed, and what was causing those schools that did succeed. And it was the assessment. It was 2 parts. It was those schools that did the weekly assessment, as Carrie just described it, and then had a protocol for exactly a clear, specific, concrete protocol for exactly what to do with those students who got less than 80%. Those schools succeeded and got better scores on their DIBELS and other assessments than they've ever had before. The protocol that they came up with really was only one of 2. Either during traditional guided reading, those students who failed the assessment worked on the spelling sound patterns that they needed more work with, both in their independent work and in work with the teacher. Or they had a 30-minute intervention block on a weekly basis for those students who didn't pass or had trouble with the assessment. So it's relatively straightforward. It's new for a lot of teachers, but it's essential to the success of this whole program. I might add also briefly, and I think we've said it before, that if a child can spell a word correctly, they can read the word correctly. And that's why the dictation is in the form of, that's why the assessment is in the form of a dictation.
Great. And we want to make sure we're aiming high when we're thinking about these early skills. And so we're asking you to consider 80% as a benchmark. If a skill is not secure for 80% of the class, then you should address it. And if students are not mastering that week's sound and spelling patterns at 80% accuracy, then you want to support them. So just taking this as a rule of thumb, when you think about how early this is in the instruction of our students, right? This is in their first or second or third year of formal education, and how big those gaps grow over the next 10 years that they're with our school systems. If we don't aim high, the gaps grow and grow and grow. So this is the time to allocate that time and that effort and really fill them in. So we've got some thoughts here on differentiation. We've talked about this a lot. Different students need different things. The main takeaway that we've said, I think, in almost every module of this course, I want to make sure that that it really hits home and goes with you outside of this course and into your classrooms, is that some students need more time and others need less. That some students catch these things very, very quickly and some don't. And what David spoke about before, this is not a reflection of intellect, but it's an instructional need. So the students who need more time need to be given more time. That needs to be prioritized. As you're doing that, we're asking you to keep that pace and teach with urgency, knowing that students can work on more than one skill at the same time. So we're not replacing the first grade scope and sequence with the kindergarten scope and sequence, because then those first graders will be behind in second grade. You don't want to create haves and have-nots in your classroom. You want to make sure that you're giving a whole lot more to the students who need more in order to catch up. Did you want to speak any more about differentiation?
Yes. Some teachers are going to be ready to completely differentiate and have multiple groups, 3 groups, let's say, would be the optimum number, and work with each of those groups on different skills and different assessments. Some teachers right away will not be able to do that. And so the differentiation for them should be along the lines of what we've been discussing. And that is, the students who didn't do well on the weekly assessment should get that extra support the next week on what they missed, while still continuing to work in that next week with the new phonics skill that is being introduced and taught. And that's a lot less of a demand on teachers' organizing ability, which is hard. It's hard to organize everything when you're still new to something. And that's why you would want to keep in mind how to do this kind of assessment and this kind of differentiation, rather, whether it's the complete differentiation where you've got 3 different groups going, 3 different skills that are being learned and 3 different assessments, or whether you want to keep everybody in the same place, but in week N+1, that second week, and then throughout the year, be sure that those students who need more time get it. It may be that those are going to be very similar students from week to week and month to month. And that's okay, because that reflects overwhelming research that some kids need more time and attention in this area and others don't. So it's your job to give it to them, and to give it to them in a way that does not make them feel bad, which is totally doable.
So we have for you just a little bit of a sample data set, thinking about what your data might look like after giving a weekly assessment. So just take a look at the sample data on this slide. You're going to use it for your online discussion this week. So in a sample class of 28 students, we've got a little more than half with no errors on this weekly dictation. We have a smaller group who were pretty close, just 1 to 2 errors on previously reviewed sounds. 2 students that have some current sound error, and 4 students who are scoring pretty low, less than 5 out of 10 with varied errors. And we want you to think about what you would do. So we'd like you to select one of those groups from the sample data and note what you would do the following week, thinking about how to keep pace and keep urgency and address the needs that you see, and engage with each other about kind of suggestions or ideas around this work. Moving now into the last kind of category of assessment, this unit assessment and stop and check. This is a chance to get more formal data. So we're now getting data over time. So we're getting to look a little more closely at what is sticking. And this looks really different from school to school and program to program, as David spoke about before. And you may or may not have that be something that's in your control as a decision maker. So you might be required to give curricular unit tests. You may have formal district assessments. We have a few examples on the screen, and you have others that you use. Or you may not have anything in place. If you don't have anything in place, we recommend just doing an expanded dictation. So follow a similar protocol and just vary the sound and spelling patterns to hit several weeks at a time. It's a pretty easy way to be responsive and sort of keep pace with the classroom. If you do have a formal assessment, our rule of thumb here is use the data that reflects your teaching. If you can't control it, don't try to control it. But be sure to pay close attention to whether you're assessing skills you've taught your students or not, and respond accordingly. If you've taught the skills, you want to monitor it closely. If you haven't taught it, if it's not aligned to what you're teaching in the classroom, then you want to not spend a ton of time on that data in terms of your responsiveness in the classroom.
Some of you out there may be thinking to yourselves, well, giving a weekly dictation and then having a clear, concrete, specific protocol for students who don't do well in that is actually fairly formal. And it is. And so I think what we're getting at here is that the 3-week or the 4-week or the unit assessments often come with the program that you're using, and they are more expansive because they're covering a larger period of time and are really going to give you, they're going to confirm what you think, or they're going to open up some new possibilities. For example, if a child is doing well every week and all of a sudden they blow the 3 or 4 week assessment, that's a lot of information. You want to keep that child in your mind's eye as well.
And we definitely want to think about the fact that this assessment should be rather quick and swift. 10 words, 1 sentence. Once the kids are in that habit and they're used to writing, often in the early stages of doing this kind of work, just pencil to paper tasks are slow. But at this point, they're doing so much practice, they should be used to it. That shouldn't be your whole phonics block on a Friday. That should be a small portion of it. It should be very quick. It should be easy for you all to grade and respond to. So keeping it as light as you possibly can and making it as useful as you possibly can. And then once again, we talked about how you're responding to this data, and this is really similar to what we went over in the early reading module, where we talked about having all students having a chance to read sound and spelling patterns in their decodable readers, and then within their small and flexible groups, thinking about differentiation for those students who have gotten it. They read one more time to make sure they're keeping pace and they move on to other things. Extra practice or extra rereading for students who are shaky, and even more practice for students who aren't there yet before those students can be moved on. So doing this very fluidly in order to help them continue to fill in their gaps and hopefully move into the got it category as soon as they are able. So actually, before we move to the practice task, anything else you want to say around assessment?
I think we've covered assessment pretty well.
Great. We look forward to your questions. I'm sure there's some individualized cases out there that you would like to discuss more in depth.
Oh, wait, I do have something based on our work with the district that we're working with.
Yeah.
In kindergarten and in first grade, some teachers were asking that, well, they've done this, their students are having trouble despite the decodables, despite the out of context, they're still having trouble with some of the earliest patterns. And in most cases, I think it was CVC words, vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant words, and such as sat, met, hat, etc. One of the things, there's 2 things to think about. They may just need even more repetition than you've been giving them, but they also may need a better and more frequent dose of phonemic awareness. And that may be behind some of the kids struggling more than you think they should be. So when you do these early assessments, keep that in mind. Some kids will need more repetition. Some kids will need more going back and doing, not necessarily going back, because you should be doing phonemic awareness throughout kindergarten and for a good chunk and for first grade as well, a good chunk. But some kids may need more. I guess the third area is anything you could do for extra support for that student before school, after school, if anything at home works, anything like that. would be something you also want to look into for kids who are consistently failing these assessments.
And connections to any other teachers who might be working with the students, so that they are, if they are getting pull-out or small group instruction outside of your class, they're getting something that's cohesive, can be really beneficial. So your Connect to Practice task this week, there are a couple of options. If you're in the classroom, you can either implement one of those assessment options, either the observation checklist or the weekly dictation, and share a summary of the data that you find. Or you can summarize the data method you already use if you feel like you have one that's optimal to share with us. We'd love to learn from you and with you. If you're not in the classroom, we'd love you to take a look at a school or a district that you have supported through your work, and summarize the phonics assessments that they currently use, or make a recommendation of what you would recommend. So this can be theoretical, or it can be something you actually do depending on the nature of your work, thinking about what they do and what you would recommend that they continue doing or change. No recommended reading specifically, but a resource that we thought you might be interested in on Engage New York, also available on CKLA's website or on Unbound Ed's website. There are something called the Assessment and Remediation Guides with each grade, kindergarten, first and second grade. I've highlighted here where you can find them if you're not used to this website. And you can take a look and just see how many options there are for responding to data and kind of at a grade level specific tasks that match up with the content of the lessons. So just explore that resource if it is of interest to you. This is our last time saying thank you for sticking with us, and hopefully you found many things that will be useful to you. All of these modules and the related handouts will be available on Achieve the Core for you to either use or revisit or share with your colleagues. The Core Advocate Network remains an option for you to enlist in or join if you are interested. And we hope to continue to stay connected with you. And in particular, we would love to hear how you're doing, how you're sharing this work. You'll be invited also to share that through our instructional advocacy survey. So thank you so much for sticking with us through all of these modules, and we look forward to seeing you on the last office hours of the call. Thank you.